I'm Ken Hirsch. I'm the Senior Director of Engineering for Orphan Audio, which is also the parent company for Eight Electronics and, of course, Electrodyne Audio. Eight started as Eight Sound Systems in approximately 1962. The primary job of Eight Sound was to build dub theaters, scoring stages, Foley pits, sound recording, film playback environments for the major film studio. This was before they were building their own equipment. So they would go into a film studio and talk with the chief engineers and say, what do you want? How do you want it to look? Are there pieces of equipment that you particularly like? They would sit down and the engineering staff would then put together the sound consoles, the film playback systems, the recording systems with whatever brand of equipment the client asked for. So in a single room, you could have Longevin, Electrodyne, Westrex, Western Electric, Altec Lansing, all put together into a recording and playback system. When Electrodyne came along, this was a perfect opportunity because of their fully integrated channel strip. Instead of having to buy a separate fader, a separate preamp, a separate EQ, a separate set of knobs and switches to create all the effects sends and so on, the Electrodyne channel strip, which was a marvelous innovation, was a let's buy one thing, drop it in, and that solves us hours and hours and hours of mechanical engineering, electronic wiring, and fiddling and fussing. So the relationship between Eight and Electrodyne at that point in time was merely a relationship of convenience. So whenever a custom console was to be built, Eight would go, okay, let's use as many of the Electrodyne components as possible because they're the most expedient and cost-effective way to build. The turning point really became sort of a legendary, nefarious incident at the Eight factory. There was a very large film console being constructed. Somewhere during the middle of the construction, there was a robbery at the Eight factory. No one has ever figured out who was responsible. Not a single one of the pieces of equipment that was stolen has ever been recovered, as far as I know. But the upshot was that Eight now had a completed console frame, and all of the console modules, which they had purchased from Electrodyne, were gone. So at this point, they decided, let's go back to Electrodyne and have them build a whole bunch more for us so we can meet the deadline. Unfortunately for Eight, fortunately for Electrodyne, this was the massive explosion of recording console demand Electrodyne was barely able to keep up with. So they were building consoles so fast, they couldn't even build the modules fast enough to fill the orders for their consoles. So as a result of this, they were not able to take care of Eight Electronics. Essentially what they did was the Eight staff went back to the factory, sat down, had a meeting, said, well, we've been doing this for so long with everyone else's gear, constantly modifying, making changes. We're all talented engineers. We have an empty console frame. We have to fill it with something. So they sat down and oddly enough, this is where the Beach Boys, Stephen Desper, and a number of other things came in. At the same time, they got funding through that to build their own company to manufacture modules. And as a result, Eight Sound Systems became Eight Electronics. All through probably an unintended consequence of somebody thinking that they were going to, shall we say, do damage, they instead fomented a revolution in the audio industry. This is from 1936. That's a manual engraver from back in the 30s. This is a manual engraver. I think this one actually came from A&M Records. The only thing you can really be certain of is that films were done at a certain studio while the Eight consoles were there. So if you talk about, say, with respect to film, 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, Paramount Pictures, Universal Studios. I could literally go down the list of all the Hollywood studios. Virtually every single one had a custom Eight film dubbing console and usually also a film scoring console. So the soundtracks and the final film mix were almost certainly during a period of time done exclusively on Eight console. And we are talking massive consoles. People think, large format consoles in a studio are big. Imagine a 3 or 4 operator console that's 28 to 32 feet wide. That's how big the film consoles were back in the golden era of film. If we look at all this, these are all film filters. These come out of film consoles, Quad 8 film consoles, and you can see each color is a little different. This was a classic color for Warner Brothers. Those came out of Lionsgate Films. These, I believe, were either Paramount or Todd AO. This was a 6-track master level control for a film recording system at 20th Century Fox. Modules from the Warner Brothers film consoles. This is the same 3-band EQ. You can actually see the same 3-band EQ. This is the 312. Same 3-band EQ as in the 310. Here's something out of Capitol Records from about 1966, 67. This is an actual Capitol Records Industries, where they built their own console module. This was somewhere between the Electrodyne consoles and the Quad 8 consoles that were installed at Capitol Records. If you talk about iconic albums or groups, we can talk about studios like Shangri-La Ranch in Malibu, Village Recorders in Santa Monica, A&M Records, Motown West. Again, it literally goes on, and we're talking consoles and studios in Nashville, New York. At one point in the 80s in Japan, there were about 100 some odd studios in Japan. 98 of those studios were equipped with custom Quad 8 console. It was almost like a conspiracy. But I think it also spoke to the culture's appreciation of finely built, handcrafted equipment, which frankly still follows to this day. You see spectacularly well-crafted equipment coming out of Japan. You know, if you look at almost anything from Steely Dan, albums recorded on the Quad 8 console that was originally at Village Recorders, which did Kiss, Steely Dan, Fleetwood Mac, endless bands in the late 70s and early 80s. One of those consoles eventually made its way to Shangri-La Ranch, which was the studio put together by Bob Dylan and the band. Probably the most iconic album was The Last Waltz. There was a string of amazing albums done on that console for decades after that. A&M Records had a custom console that was spectacular. Literally, it goes on and on. I literally have to write a list of the top 100 studios in America and a second one of the top 100 studios in the rest of the world that were fitted with Quad 8 consoles. Here we go, some original modules from the Bradley's Barn console from Nashville with the amazing artists that recorded on that. This is from the Alfred Hitchcock Theater at Universal Studios, Quad 8, custom Quad 8 333 EQ. I can't even imagine the number of films that were recorded on these modules. It's kind of interesting that the original intent was not to bring Quad 8 electronics back. The original intent was under the auspices of Orphan Audio, which was originally formed in the early 80s to preserve documentation, repair parts, and the intellectual knowledge of how to keep the vintage gear running. I got introduced to Quad 8, which was still quite strong and in business at that time. And it organically evolved that I got introduced to more and more of the members of the company, engineering staff, salespeople, design engineers, things like that. At a certain point in time, a friend of mine and I believe the general manager of Quad 8 informed me that the company that had purchased Quad 8, Electori Corporation, aka Mitsubishi, had decided that they wanted to end their partnership with Quad 8 and dissolve the company. So at that time, I was invited to come up and go through everything at the factory that was not being taken by Electori and recover spare parts, documentation, test jigs, engineering notes, manufacturing templates, literally anything and everything that was based on what we'd call the vintage aspect. Anything from, at that point, when about 1970, 1968 forward, and pick up all that and bring it into my sort of preservation warehouse. This is all original docs, either from factories or factory documentation, or it came from, and then another one, or it came from a customer who had the original documents for their console, and yet another one. And this isn't even all of it. It keeps going on and on and on. Original drawings. Some of these I actually copied at the factory when I had the chance to make copies of the originals. Some of these came from customers, and this is part of our whole preservation thing. We take blueprints and documents. You can see how the quality of these things can vary wildly. Here's the same print, but you can see it's not been as well kept. It's yellowed and faded. Here's an original engraving template as a perfect example of an absolute original drawing. This one is 69, and that's the actual drawing for the front panel. As I was supporting the existing Quad 8 gear, I realized I had to open the company. So I went about acquiring the trademarks and securing the intellectual property of the company, and then started reopening the doors. And at that point, Quad 8 was reopened as more of a boutique manufacturer, custom products and restoration and racking of the vintage gear. When people ask me about the idea of the Quad 8 sound and the design philosophies that are the basis of that, a lot of times it's easier to reference the idea that any pro audio company that came out of and survived the 60s and the 70s and so on. We're talking essentially electronic engineers or scientists, audio scientists, for lack of a better term, that were trying to further the art. It was their entire goal was to design and build the best possible circuitry to create the most faithful reproduction of sound possible and provide the most flexible and powerful tools. And then secondarily, they were looking for something that was reliable and rugged and dependable. The idea of trying to do it one better than even your last effort was a basic canon of how these engineers approached the idea of sound. The primary differences, I would say, that set Quad 8 apart was they were probably the first company to use a high voltage op amp. So rather than running at just say, I'm going to go deep into a technical trench here, but the idea of early consoles ran at 24 volts. A single rail of 24 volts. The next sort of generation from that stepped up to running at 2 voltages of 15 volts, which would give you, instead of 24 volts, you get a 36 volt range. What Quad 8 did was they decided, let's step that one more. Let's set up so that we don't have to step the sound up and down in order to get our levels. Let's start with an amplifier that can handle the full range of audio in one component, and so said, let's run the voltage rails at plus and minus 28 volts. So a 56 volt range. I mean, that's half of American line voltage, which is 110 volts. That's a lot of voltage. So therefore, you have these tremendous amount of headroom. I mean, plus minus 28 volts under the worst of conditions will give you an output of almost plus 28 dBm. The average converter now is plus 24. That's 0 dBFS. And of course, we're getting highly technical here, but the idea was that the console was capable of that and more. So you had headroom. So as a result, your electronics, your transformers, all the components had to be designed to handle this extremely wide dynamic range and huge levels. So therefore, it all had to be brought up to a next level of quality, which required all the engineering and design staff, the manufacturers, the component companies to go, well, we now have to build something that can reach that level of capability. So all these things came together to create a product that truly stood apart for its capability of doing things that other consoles at the time simply couldn't quite make. As far as I'm aware, they were probably the first company to come out with a standard 3-band EQ for consoles. This started out as an option in approximately 1970, which was the MM312, the MM310, which was a 3-band inductor EQ. This design, I'd say, had almost a 20-year run. That design was still being manufactured in 1984, one of the last consoles they built for, I think, for the USC film department. Even into the late 80s, if you walked into the Quad 8 factory and said, I'd like you to build these modules, they would happily sit down and build them for you. So even in the era when integrated circuits and gyrator-based equalizers, very fancy all-electronic equalizers were kind of the standard, Quad 8 would still, on request, say, okay, if this is what you want, we will build what you want. That's even true today to the way that we run Quad 8. You walk in and say, I would like you to build this. We'll sit down with you and figure out a way to make it work. That was one of the Quad 8 corporate colors was, even though this is an Electrodyne module, this was there were two colors. One was known as pumpkin and the other was known as bittersweet. One of the things that, some people either question or conversely are completely unaware of is that, Quad 8 and Electrodyne were fierce competitors in the late 60s, early 70s. And there was always the idea of this camp says, well, they don't have that. They can't possibly compete with us and back and forth. I dealt with the same thing when I was service manager for Euphonics and we were competing against SSL and Neve. You always heard the rumors about, oh, they're going to go out of business any day, and oh, they can't possibly do that. It's like, okay, sure. The interesting thing is that I acquired both of these companies over about a decade's time. The idea was that their design philosophies were remarkably similar as far as the materials they used, the type of components they used. Their internal technologies were quite different. There are some who say that this is, from my perspective, this is somewhat comical. There's some people out there who say that the first Quad 8 consoles were Electrodyne modules with the Quad 8 logo engraved on them. To this day, no one has yet found me a module that can prove that. The transition was very abrupt and very, very singular. From an electronic engineer's point of view, the differences are not subtle under the hood. But from a user's perspective, they do appear very similar. They do function quite similarly. They were designed to do the same job. So the confusion is understandable to a certain extent. But eventually acquiring these two companies and joining them into one group was actually really fun, very fulfilling, and for me as a designer and engineer, very, very satisfying because of the opportunity I got to sit down and learn from the actual design engineers who built these circuits, to pull out a document and say, when you designed this, I saw this, this, and this, and then I saw that, and I'm going, what were you thinking? Half joking, but half I wasn't really understanding because I'm still learning. Even at my age, I am still learning. And I relish that opportunity to sit down with one of the great masters and learn. So the joining of these two companies has been an organic adventure that has been an absolute joy over 30 to 40 plus years now. So to be the curator of these documents is kind of the audio equivalent of the Smithsonian or one of the major museums that's, I won't call it art, but to an engineer like myself, it is art. This is preservation of the past. We're going back to, in many cases, the Longevin collection goes back to the 1940s. The Electrodyne is 1950s up to the kind of the mid-70s. Quad 8 is about 1962 to about 89 as far as the original company. And it's kind of amazing that I'm able to collect not only the schematics, the manufacturing drawings, the templates, the actual test jigs, and a lot of times historical data as well. I've got actual historical documents from when famous engineers were hired as chief engineers at Quad 8 Electronics. You know, Quad 8 Electronics was known, had a nickname as Bud's School for Engineers. And it was staggering to see the number of legendary designers and engineers that went through the Quad 8 factory. Almost every single one of the designers and engineers is now considered a legend in the industry, or in some cases is still running one of the major film studios or post-production houses or one of the manufacturing companies that's out there. I actually like the commentary, the comment of warm, wide, and effortlessly musical. I have to say that I like to listen to other people's opinions far more than my own analytical viewpoint. It's enlightening and somewhat illuminating to hear other people's impressions of our gear. Plus, it gives me an insight as to how people perceive what the gear is doing. I can sit there and parrot back what I think it's doing over and over endlessly, like I'm standing at a trade show and trying to sell a piece of gear to someone. But it's much more gratifying to hear all the amazing descriptions and then try to reformat those into what the customers tell me the gear is doing, what the user tells me the gear is doing. The phrase warm, wide, effortlessly musical is really quite apt. The idea that if you add the input transformer, the output transformer, the inductors in the EQ, the selection of the frequencies, how they're spaced, all of those make the MM310 an utterly unique, kind of an absurdly long-lived piece of equipment in the industry. The fact that it started in approximately 1970, it stayed in production well into the mid-80s, again, when ICs should have completely supplanted it and eliminated its capabilities. It remained an important sonic tool to so many people. The fact that it got rediscovered over and over and over again. When you look at the cyclical nature of the pro audio industry, you see how gear goes in and out of favor. The gear that keeps coming back over and over and over again keeps making that statement that there is something special about this. The secondary piece of the puzzle is that the Quad 8 gear is so rugged, so repairable, and so long-lived that simply by the fact that it outlives so much other fragile gear, it's going to remain one of those staples, let alone the fact that it's a spectacular sounding piece of gear. You look at the harmonic resonances that are generated by every stage of that EQ, and the way that as you change the controls and you change the type of program material and the dynamic range, the levels of what goes through it, the EQ responds in a very organic, a very, shall we say, electromechanical way that you simply can't do with ICs. You can't do with a generic DAW that is just going, okay, I'm going to be a sort of a basic EQ. If you're not aiming at something where, in this case, you're modeling the components, you're modeling the various responses, you're looking at how that waveform travels through the circuitry and excites certain parts of the circuit. If you're not doing that specifically, you will never get that, for lack of a better term, the excitement that a piece of music gets as it travels through either the hardware or, in this case, as far as I can tell, the first plugin that has actually done Quad 8 justice. The idea that so many companies had approached me over a 15+ year period never seemed to really work out with any of them. I think Mixwave was the first company that truly showed me enough of a serious viewpoint and an understanding of the legacy of where it came from. And because of that understanding, also really had kind of a grip on where the plugin can go if properly presented, and in the process of remind people of how and why the hardware itself became what it is and has lasted as long as it has. When evaluating a plugin, there are a lot of things to consider. It's a little more difficult when you're looking at something that is in software, is supposed to emulate what it is that I've lived with all my life in hardware. The main difficulty is in making sure that the true essence, the functionality, the subtleties, the things that are kind of the basis of what that plugin offers you compared to the hardware. If it grabs the essence and then carries it a bit forward, I have no problem with that idea. My whole idea of a piece of hardware and a piece of software, each doing something that the other can't do. I mean, plugins still have some limitations, but every generation, they're getting better and better and better. There's always a huge concern that maybe this couldn't actually be done, and I will absolutely say that easily a decade before this, it wasn't possible. There would always be those sort of spectacular nuances that just didn't come through just because of computing power and so on. But the Mixwave team seems to have really grasped the essence of it, and with independent reviewers, people who I don't know, they don't know me, are picking up the exact same things from this plugin that the hardware users get. So that is extremely reassuring that someone who knows nothing about the product drops it into their DAW. I know nothing about their acoustic environment, but they know it well enough that when they drop it in there, they're describing, the words they're using are the same as I've heard from hundreds, thousands of hardware owners. They get the depth, the warmth, the harmonic richness, the certain types of details, certain things that are quite unique to the Quad 8 sound, the sort of the creaminess that is almost a signature with the transformers. The articulation, which is sometimes unique when it comes to a piece of inductor and transformer coupled equipment. Another hallmark of the Quad 8 electronics is that sort of articulation, the cleanliness, the accuracy, while still imparting this vast array of harmonics that still does not get in the way of the sound as many other transformer coupled inductor EQs can do. Yeah, the question was posed, gain matching as more and more harmonics enter the musical envelope. There are certain types of harmonics which will add perceived level. There are certain types of harmonics which do not. There's yet another type of harmonics based on the program material and how you're setting the EQ that become an integral part of the sound as you're shaping it. You're using an equalizer, so therefore the entire intent is to accentuate or de-accentuate certain things to achieve a specific tonal response within the framework of the entire song. Being able to control that artistically from the engineer's or the mixing engineer's point of view is always an artistic choice. So it becomes one of those things where to gain match or not gain match, that's entirely up to the actual person doing the work. Was your intent to push that sound forward? Did the plugin do what you're looking for as far as accentuating with harmonics or with equalization? The idea of bringing that sound forward, or conversely, blending it into the program in such a way that it is extremely desirable and adds to rather than detracts or stands out and says, "Hi, look at me." And that's not always what you want to do. Sometimes the idea is when you add that harmonic enhancement, which can or may not add level, did it do exactly what you wanted to do? So it's never a question of absolute gain matching versus not gain matching. It's, did it do what you wanted to do as you were making the manipulation to the sound? How do I balance the idea of here's the original sound that the plugin is recreating, and then here are these additional features that were added to the plugin. How do I see that as a plus or a minus? The amazing thing is, for me, it's not a plus or a minus. It's a, how is this product going to be used? We start with the basis of, we've created an exact duplicate in software of every component, every function, every resonance, every response to program material. Then the additional features and functions, the parallel mix, some of the additional filtering, the additional gain control. These are tools that are very popular and demanded by the modern recordists who use it now. If you took an MM310 and you put it into a rack, a piece of hardware, I don't see why those exact same tools that were added to the plugin would not have been used in a hardware environment. So therefore, I don't see that detracting. I see them adding by simply saying, okay, rather than you having to add 5 different pieces of hardware to get the result that you're after, it's now in the plugin and it does not affect the sound of the original, which is inherently there in the design. Ultimately, I'm not a sales engineer, I'm a designer. I work with empirical evidence as a recording engineer, as a live sound mixer, as a musician. The objective is, how do I get what I'm after? There are certain things where it's like, okay, I'm trying to get a sound that's very much like, say, Dean Parks, or I'm trying to get the same guitar sound as Kiss. I don't know. Something that was recorded, or Robbie Robertson. I'm trying to get a sound that was recorded through a Quad 8 console. I got to say that process is, choose your tools based on where you think you want the sound to go, and then close your eyes and twist the knobs until you get what you're looking for. Sometimes the knob twisting is absolutely not what you expected. I have done, this actually goes for the Electrodyne products as well. I have grabbed a knob and twisted it far, far further than I thought was even reasonable, and ended up with a sound that was completely unexpected. And conversely, other program material will come in, and I think I'm going to be making these huge changes, and I'll grab a knob and I'll turn it 1 step and sit back and all of a sudden go, that was it. I made a 2 dB change at 10 kilohertz. And it's like, huh, okay, my job's done here. I just earned my money. These are the things that your ears will tell you. DAWs are a visual whirlwind of distractions and visual input, and sort of a, how shall I say, it's visually noisy to look at a DAW. Your ears are always the most important tool in a recording studio. There are times when I will take a t-shirt and throw it over the DAW screen and just, I'll lift it up so I know that I'm got the mouse on the right control, and then just sit there and use my ears to hear what the heck's going on. Because sometimes it's hard to turn your eyes off when you've got this wonderful, ooh, shiny in front of you. So yeah, that's one of the hardest things, to get yourself to realize that it is all about the sound.